You open your eyes. The world is stone. Cold, damp, unyielding stone beneath your hooves, towering stone walls to your left and right, and the imagined weight of a stone sky somewhere above the perpetual gloom. The air is stale, thick with the scent of your own breath, wet fur, and a subterranean chill that has long since settled deep into your bones. It is the only world you have ever known. A series of corridors, identical and endless, punctuated by the rhythmic, lonely sound of your own unsteady steps. A draft, thin and sharp, snakes its way from some distant corner, carrying with it a phantom scent, salt, blooming flowers, the world. It is a language you can almost understand, a cruel reminder of a place that is not this. You are an interruption, a flaw in the perfect, geometric silence of your prison. Ah, consciousness returns to Crete's most embarrassing heirloom. A flicker of self-awareness in the creature they built a building to forget. Official designation, Monstrum Minoicus, a clinical, tidy label for something so profoundly messy. But you are known to the world that you will never see, simply as the Minotaur, a name that literally means the bull of Minos. Not your own name, you'll notice. From the very beginning, your identity was simply a piece of property, a branding exercise for the king who was both your stepfather and your warden. Your story isn't a myth. It's a tragedy about very, very poor family planning. Let's go back to the beginning. The brutal, undignified, and frankly bewildering start of it all. You were not born of nature. You were born of a conspiracy between a spiteful god, a lustful queen, and an unfortunate bull who was, in all likelihood, just minding his own business. There was no warm nest, no secluded den prepared for your arrival. Your first sensation was the shocking chill of polished marble floors against your skin. Your first smell was not the earthy aroma of a mother's den, but the cloying fragrance of expensive incense trying and failing to mask the scent of blood and panic in a royal bedchamber. You were a live birth, a screaming, thrashing paradox of flesh and fur pushed into a world that was in no way prepared for you. The midwife fainted. The servants fled, their whispers echoing down the halls like scattering leaves. Your mother, Queen Pasiphae, looked upon you not with warmth, but with a wide-eyed, exhausted horror. She saw in your infant face the undeniable evidence of her transgression. She saw a divine punishment with her husband's eyes. You, in your first moments of life, represented nothing more than a political and marital catastrophe of the highest order. There was no cooing, no gentle embrace. The immediate conflict was your very existence. Your father, the magnificent Cretan bull, was probably enjoying a nice patch of clover somewhere, entirely oblivious to the abomination he had helped create. Your stepfather, the great King Minos, did not rush to your side. Oh, he rushed, but not to you. He rushed to his architects, his face a mask of cold, calculated fury. Before you could even stand on your own unsteady hoops, the blueprints for your cage were being drawn up. Your welcome to the world was the sound of chisels on stone, the construction of the labyrinth. Your cradle was a prison. There was no sibling rivalry to contend with. You were, mercifully, a singular mistake. The primary danger you faced was the quiet, suffocating finality of your abandonment. You were a scandal to be managed, a monster to be contained. You were passed from horrified nurse to nervous guard, a hot potato of royal shame, until you were finally big enough, strong enough, to be cast into the custom-built darkness that would become your entire universe. And so your juvenile years began. A struggle, yes, but not for survival in any traditional sense. It was a struggle against the crushing weight of monotony. Your main adversary wasn't a predator. It was architecture. It was the genius of Daedalus himself, turned toward the singular purpose of making sure you never, ever found a way out. Every day was a lesson in the futility of hope. You would walk, driven by some vestigial instinct, searching for an exit that did not exist. You would trace the walls with your hands, feeling the cold, seamless stone, searching for a crack, a flaw, a single mistake in the perfect geometry of your confinement. There was none. Your world was a flawless trap. Your only other adversaries were loneliness, a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight, and the echoes of your own frustrated bellows. Your survival strategy was pathetic because it required no strategy at all. You just had to continue breathing. Food, one assumes, was provided. Lowered from some grate in the ceiling, a grim daily reminder that your life was being sustained by the very people who had locked you away. You weren't living. You were being kept alive. Your situation was the mythological equivalent of being a trust fund baby locked in a mansion with no internet. All your needs are met, except the one that truly matters: freedom. Your pathetic strategy to survive was simply to endure the endless procession of identical moments. It was a strategy of pure, maddening patience. Think of it as the world's most miserable form of solitary confinement, but with the added indignity of knowing it was designed by your own family. What skills were you to learn? Hunting. Your meals were catered. Fighting. Your only opponent was the unyielding stone, and the stone always won. You'd charge at the walls in fits of youthful rage, a desperate explosion of pent-up energy, only to end in a heap, your head ringing, your horns scraping uselessly against the impassive surface. Your clumsy failures weren't in the process of learning, but in the process of being. You were a creature built for open plains, for stampeding, for dominance, yet you were confined in narrow corridors that chafed your shoulders and scraped your horns. You possessed the raw, primal instincts of a bull, fused with the dawning, confused consciousness of a man. This combination did not result in profound insight. It resulted in a constant, simmering, directionless fury. You were a masterpiece of flawed design, an engine of immense power with nowhere to go, eternally idling in the dark. Then you reached what could loosely be called adulthood. You grew into your full, terrifying power. Your shoulders broadened, your muscles hardened, your horns became formidable weapons. Within the claustrophobic confines of your stone-walled kingdom, you were the absolute, undisputed monarch. An apex predator whose entire ecosystem consisted of moss, rats, and the occasional, very unlucky beetle. You could now shatter the stones you once merely scraped against. You could send tremors through the passages with a single, frustrated stomp of your hoof. This was the peak of your power. A false sense of security settled in. Nothing could harm you in here. You were perfectly safe, and perfectly trapped. A king with a kingdom of one, and a crown of pure despair. And just when your life had solidified into this predictable, miserable rhythm, the twist arrived. Just when you thought your existence could not get any more surreal or insulting, they introduced a new variable. They started sending you visitors. But this wasn't a solution to your profound loneliness. It was an intrusion of the most bizarre and cruel kind. Every few years, the heavy grind of a hidden stone door would echo through the labyrinth, and a group of 7 young men and 7 young women from a place called Athens would be shoved inside. They were not companions. They were screaming, crying, terrified reminders of a world you were barred from. They brought with them the scent of sunlight, of open air, of a life you could only dimly imagine through the cruel trick of that phantom draft. They were the embodiment of everything you were not. This wasn't some brutal, necessary mating ritual. You were a sterile hybrid, a genetic dead end. This wasn't the hunt of a predator securing its next meal, not really. It was the pointless, grotesque burden of being an instrument of foreign policy. You were the grisly centerpiece of a treaty, the living embodiment of a threat king Minos used to keep his rivals in line. You never asked for these sacrifices. You were just the groundskeeper of this miserable rock garden, and they were a periodic delivery of noisy, frantic lawn ornaments. Imagine the sheer annoyance of it. Your profound, tomb-like silence, the one thing you could count on, shattered by the sounds of their weeping and their panicked, stumbling footsteps. They would run, and your instincts, honed by nothing but confinement and rage, would kick in. The encounter was always brief, always messy. It wasn't a fight. It was pest control. It was the grim, joyless task of cleaning up the mess your stepfather had sent you. Each time it ended, the silence that returned was deeper, heavier, more profound than before, tainted by the memory of their fear. You weren't a monster indulging its bloodlust. You were a janitor, performing a terrible, state-sanctioned chore in the dark. This was your peak. This was your purpose. A political tool, a garbage disposal, and a prisoner, all rolled into one pathetic, monstrous package. You never had the luxury of a slow decline, the quiet dignity of old age. Your life was an artificial construct, and its end was just as contrived as its beginning. You didn't grow weaker from the passage of years. Your joints didn't begin to ache. You didn't lose your formidable strength. You just grew more and more saturated with the rage and despair of your confinement. Your status couldn't fall, because you had no status. Your entire resume consisted of a single entry, monster in a box. It was a pass/fail position, and you were passing with flying colors. Your final confrontation, therefore, wasn't with a younger, stronger rival trying to usurp your territory. It was with an idea. It arrived in the form of a man named Theseus, a prince from Athens, bulging with unearned confidence and a hero complex. He wasn't a predator you could no longer fend off. He was the first and only real challenge you had ever faced. He came prepared. He had a sword, a sharp and deadly piece of metal, something you had never seen before. More importantly, he had a plan, whispered to him by your own half-sister Ariadne. He had a ball of string. A simple, almost laughable tool, yet it was a key to the puzzle that had been your entire life. It was a technology that rendered your home field advantage utterly meaningless. You had rage. You had years of accumulated, incandescent fury. You had brute strength. You knew every corner, every dead end, every trick of the echoing acoustics in your stone world. It should have been an easy victory. He was an intruder, a trespasser. But he was something you weren't. He was the protagonist of the story. You were just the final obstacle before the credits rolled. He fought with purpose, with a strategy. You fought with the wild, unfocused anger of a caged animal. It was the clash of a narrative against a force of nature, and the narrative always wins. He had a future, a destiny. You just had a past filled with dark corridors. And so, you lost. Of course you lost. It was inevitable, written in a script you never got to read. He met your charge not with equal brute force, but with a clever sidestep, a precise thrust of his sword. The pain was a shocking, blinding surprise. It was the first new sensation you had felt in years. And then, the last. Your death was not noble. It was not a glorious battle to be sung by poets. It was a home invasion that ended in a quick, efficient murder. You collapsed onto the cold stone floor that had been your only companion, the life bleeding out of you, your final, rattling breath mingling with the stale, familiar air of your lifelong prison. The ultimate punchline. The one time someone came to visit who wasn't just a terrified, screaming appetizer, he killed you. It was the universe delivering a final, brutal critique of your hopelessly flawed existence. There was no new generation of your kind waiting in the wings. There was no cycle to reset. You were sterile, a singular creation of perverted science or divine whim, a biological mule. Your bloodline began and ended with you, a short, pathetic sentence in the book of life. The cycle that began anew as your body grew cold was not yours. The camera of history pulls back, you see, leaving your cooling corpse on the floor of your forgotten prison. It follows the hero, Theseus, as he emerges from the darkness of the labyrinth, blinking in the brilliant Cretan sunlight. He is hailed, celebrated, crowned a champion. The cycle that resets is his. He goes on to a life of fame, of kingship, of adventure, and as it happens, his own long list of deeply human, entirely self-inflicted tragedies. But that's his story. Your part in it is over. Your entire, miserable existence was nothing more than a single, bloody stepping stone in his ascent to greatness. You weren't even a chapter. You were a footnote in the biography of a better marketed hero. So, why does it suck to be a Minotaur? Because your entire existence, your unnatural birth, your imprisoned life, your pathetic death, was nothing more than a single, bloody prop in someone else's story. You were the monster under the bed, and your only purpose was to be vanquished so that the child could feel brave. So, that's it. Your life. A short, brutal, and ultimately meaningless footnote in Greek mythology. You'd think being born a monster, imprisoned in a maze, and then murdered by a glorified fraternity brother would be enough tragedy for one creature. But you were unlucky. Your body died, but your idea didn't. You were far too useful for that. And that's when your personal, biological tragedy became a historical catastrophe. Because if there's one thing humans love more than a hero, it's a good monster they can use for their own purposes. Your silent legacy was just beginning, and it would prove to be a prison far more vast and inescapable than the labyrinth ever was. Your first historical role was in the ancient world, an age of what can only be described as confused worship. When they first conceived of you in the halls of Knossos and the terrified minds of their subjects, you were the perfect paradox. Were you a god, a monster, or... Well, the things you ate weren't exactly lunch, were they? You were a monstrosity, yes, but one with a divine pedigree. You were a walking, snorting sign of Poseidon's fury and King Minos' profound humiliation. You weren't a vague forest spirit they could leave offerings for. You were a royal scandal made flesh, living in the basement. The immediate reaction wasn't all irreverence. It was pure, unadulterated political terror. You were a walking diplomatic crisis. The sheer absurdity of it is that you were simultaneously a divine curse, a punishment from the heavens, and also a creature that had to be fed, housed, and managed. You were a celestial pet with a nasty temperament and a deeply inconvenient origin story. They didn't worship you. They managed you. Your divine status was immediately and brilliantly weaponized by your stepfather. Your usefulness wasn't in your strength or your hide. It was in your reputation. You became the ultimate deterrent. Minos didn't need an army at Athens' gates when he had you in his back pocket. He just needed the story of you. Being painted on pottery, a testament to your fearsome nature, didn't stop them from using you as a political boogeyman. It enhanced it. The first organized hunt against you was, in fact, an organized delivery service. A calculated, political maneuver where the tribute of Athenian youths wasn't just a punishment. It was a public demonstration of your existence, and by extension, Minos' power. They weren't trying to poke you with a sharp stick. They were shoving their political problems through your front door. You weren't exploited for your bones or tools. You were exploited for the terror you inspired, a resource more valuable than any gold. The collateral damage of your existence was felt most keenly in Athens. You never wandered through their pathetic attempts at agriculture, trampling their crops. No, their own children were marched directly into your home. You became the explicit reason for their grief, the monstrous face they could put on their subjugation. You were officially declared the villain of the story for simply existing in the manner your captors had designed. Think of the staggering, monumental injustice of it all. You are imprisoned from birth for a crime you didn't commit, the crime of being born. Then, you are condemned for surviving on the only terms offered to you, for eating the meals that are hand-delivered and locked in with you. You were the perfect scapegoat. A monster who could not speak to plead his case, could not reason, could not offer any narrative other than the one they wrote for you. A monster conveniently locked away from public view, where the myth could grow unchecked by any inconvenient reality. You weren't just a prisoner. You were a blank canvas onto which they painted all their fear and fury. So, what is the ultimate cynical takeaway from this first chapter of your legacy? What is the era's punchline? It's that being a divine curse is just another way of saying you're a highly effective political asset for a ruthless king. It's that being a monster is just a job description written, assigned, and supervised by your jailer. Your tragic legacy, Part 1, is that you are the perfect monster for the ruling class. Absolutely terrifying to the general public and their foreign rivals, but completely contained, managed, and harmless to the people in charge. You were a fiction they maintained to control their reality. Then came the long, slow march of centuries. Empires rose and fell. The gods of Olympus were retired and replaced by a single, more demanding deity. And in this new medieval and early modern world, you found a new kind of work. This was the age of your systematic misery. The first impression of you changed. You were no longer the specific, localized political tool of a Cretan king. You were upgraded, globalized. In this new era of organized religion, you were no longer a bad omen for one city. You became a bad omen for all of mankind. The question was no longer, are you a tool or a product? But are you a symbol of sin, a metaphor for damnation? To the theologians and scholars of the Christian world, you were a gift. You were the perfect, literal illustration of what happens when the beast within man is allowed to conquer the soul. In the meticulously structured circles of Dante's Inferno, you're not just a random beast. You are the gatekeeper to the circle of violence, a creature of pure, mindless rage, gnawing on your own fury. You were no longer a beast of burden in the literal sense, but a moral one, forced to carry the heavy symbolic weight of their deepest theological anxieties. You had a new job, cautionary tale. Your new job title was metaphor, and you were systematically exploited in every church, every monastery, every allegorical text produced for 1,000 years. You were no longer the property of a single king, but the public domain intellectual property of the entire church. Your image was used to scare generations of illiterate peasants into piety. You were no longer bred for a labyrinth, but for the pages of illuminated manuscripts, your form twisted by the imaginations of monks into something ever more grotesque, ever more demonic, a perfect visual aid for a sermon on the horrors of hell. Your horns, once just a biological reality, now became potent symbols of the demonic. Your human torso and bull's head, once a mere genetic anomaly, now represented the corruption of man's divine form by bestial passion. You were an entry in a ledger book of sins, a go-to example of wrath, of lust, of everything they feared and loathed about their own nature. You were, in short, extremely useful. The collateral damage of this era was subtle, but profound. Their technological progress, the printing press, meant that your story, and your new, villainous role in it, could be mass-produced and distributed across the known world. You weren't threatened by iron traps or firearms. You were being systematically assassinated by footnotes, commentaries, and theological treatises. The fight for your identity became a one-sided intellectual slaughter. As their empires expanded, your image was exported right alongside their armies and missionaries. In every new land they discovered, you were introduced as a universal symbol of the pagan, the heretic, the unholy other. You became a convenient label to slap onto anyone they wished to conquer or convert. Your silent, long-dead form was enlisted in a global crusade, your image used to justify their violence and sanctify their conquests. You never found peace in death. You were simply conscripted into a new, endless war of ideas. You had finally escaped the stone labyrinth of Knossos, only to be permanently imprisoned in the far more intricate, inescapable labyrinth of their dogma. And what is the deeply ironic punchline of this age? What is your tragic legacy, part 2? It's that your strength, once the physical terror of Crete, was transformed into a symbolic power. A power that was then used to build the very ideological empires that define their world. Your beauty was never a concern, but your ugliness, your monstrousness, became the very reason you were hunted down in texts and sermons, held up as an emblem of all that must be repressed and destroyed. You weren't a creature anymore. You were an idea, and ideas are much harder to kill, but much easier to twist. Then came the modern and industrial world, and with it, the age of your sentimental hypocrisy. The world lit up with electricity, engines roared to life, and the old fears began to recede, replaced by a new, more clinical kind of thinking. Their first impression of you shifted once again. You were no longer a political threat or a religious symbol. You were redefined. You became a scientific specimen, a psychological case study. In the quiet, smoke-filled studies of Vienna, men with beards and theories looked back at your myth and saw not a monster, but a powerful archetype. You were the eyed, the untamed beast lurking in the labyrinth of the human subconscious. You were a data point for their new science of the mind, a convenient illustration for their theories on repression and inner conflict. Simultaneously, and with no sense of irony, you were being turned into a logo, a commodity, the final boss in the new mythology of video games. A cheap special effect in a string of forgettable monster movies. A cool, aggressive image to put on a t-shirt or a heavy metal album cover. You were no longer a sin to be feared, but a complex to be analyzed, or, even better, a product to be licensed and sold. Your new usefulness, your final job in this brave new world, was to inspire a very specific and very marketable kind of guilt. After being replaced by machines as a source of labor, and by science as a source of fear, your new purpose was to be an object of study and a symbol of a past they could now feel comfortably superior to. You became a topic for earnest undergraduate essays, a puzzle for tweed-clad archaeologists carefully brushing dust off the ruins of Knossos, a misunderstood, tragic figure for revisionist novelists who wanted to tell your side of the story. You were now a living symbol of humanity's destructive, superstitious past. Look how barbaric they were, they'd say, while programming a digital version of you to be dismembered by a space marine in their latest blockbuster game. The absurdity of it all was breathtaking. You were preserved by the very same species that had first imagined you, then vilified you, and now pitied you, all while turning a tidy profit on your back. You became an object of their nostalgia for a world they had themselves destroyed. And what does this modern conservation feel like from your perspective? It is the prison of kindness, the most suffocating confinement of all. It is a safe haven where you are fed a steady diet of new interpretations, but stripped of all your original, terrifying purpose. You are a tourist attraction in the air-conditioned museum of mythology. You are no longer a threat, you are a curiosity. The cameras flash, not in fear, but in detached fascination. Tourists wander through the reconstructed ruins of your prison, listening to a guide drone on about your tragic fate, before buying a small ceramic replica of you in the gift shop. You have become a living museum exhibit for the descendants of your destroyers, a way for them to feel a fleeting, sentimental pang of sympathy for the misunderstood monster. They feel good about pitying you. It makes them feel enlightened, compassionate. They have caged you once more, not with walls of stone, but with the bars of their patronizing sympathy. It is a comfortable prison, perhaps, but one where you are stripped of all your power, all your mystery, and all your dignity. You are no longer feared, which, for a monster, is the true death. So we arrive at the finale, the ultimate, most profound irony of your modern existence. What is your tragic legacy, the grand punchline to this millennia-long joke? It's that after taking everything from you, your freedom, your life, your identity, your power to inspire fear, they now spend millions to keep your story alive in a cage of academic discourse and pop culture cliché, primarily so they can feel better about themselves. They have successfully transformed you from a terrifying reality into a harmless piece of intellectual property. The final, cynical truth of your long, miserable relationship with humanity is this. They have finally discovered a way to neutralize you that is more complete, more absolute than any hero sword. They have made you boring. They have made you predictable. They have made you a trope. Your ultimate, eternal fate wasn't to be feared or to be hated, but to be endlessly, blandly, and profitably repackaged for consumption. You have been utterly and completely tamed, not by a hero, but by a marketing department. And there is no hope, ever, of escaping that labyrinth. It is the labyrinth of their own minds, and they've furnished it with gift shops. Your legacy is now managed by committee, debated at academic conferences where scholars argue over the symbolic significance of your horn length in late Minoan pottery. They project their own anxieties onto your blank, monstrous slate. You are a symbol of toxic masculinity. You are a metaphor for the oppressed proletariat rising against the ruling class. You are an allegory for humanity's struggle against its base instincts. You are whatever the current intellectual fashion needs you to be, a versatile mannequin to be dressed in the latest critical theory. And each interpretation, each published paper, adds another layer of paint to the walls of your new prison, the prison of endless, tedious analysis. Let's talk about your most popular modern job, video game boss. Somewhere, right now, a teenager in a darkened room is chugging an energy drink, their face illuminated by a screen on which a pixelated, heavily armored hero is about to enter the labyrinth of lost souls, which is, of course, your home. This digital version of you doesn't feel the cold stone. It follows a coded patrol path. It has predictable attack patterns. A charge, a ground stomp that sends out a shockwave, a roar that does area of effect damage. The player has to learn your 3-phase attack cycle, dodge roll to expose your glowing weak point, usually located, with thudding obviousness, on your back, and chip away at your health bar. Upon defeat, you don't just die. You explode into a shower of gold coins, experience points, and maybe a rare piece of armor called the Horns of Asterion. Your great, tragic existence has been gamified into a 10-minute long, repeatable farming run for virtual loot. That is the conservation of your spirit in the 21st century. Or perhaps you'd prefer your literary career. The market for misunderstood monsters is booming. Imagine the bookshelves. There's the young adult novel where you're not a monster, but a brooding, sensitive soul named Ash who falls in love with a plucky Athenian girl who sees the real you behind the horns. It's a tragic romance that ends with her crying as Theseus, portrayed as a jock-like bully, slays you. There's the gritty, revisionist historical fiction novel written from your perspective, full of hard-boiled prose. The Labyrinth was a tough beat. The Dane, Ariadne, played me for a fool. I knew the hero was bad news the second he walked into my maze with his fancy sword and his smug attitude. They give you an inner monologue, a backstory, a motivation. They try to make you relatable. They strip you of your monstrous mystery and replace it with predictable, human-style angst. It is the ultimate act of condescension. They have decided that the only way to value you is to pretend you were just like them all along, only hairier. And then there is the ultimate prison of kindness, the world of self-help. Your tragedy has been co-opted by life coaches and pop psychologists. You'll find books with titles like Navigate Your Labyrinth, A Minotaur's Guide to Conquering Your Inner Maze. In these books, you are a metaphor for the reader's personal challenges. The labyrinth is their dead-end job, their messy divorce, their fear of failure. Theseus is the mentor figure who helps them slay their inner minotaur, that is, their self-destructive habits. You, the actual creature of rage and despair, have been reduced to a cartoonish stand-in for procrastination. Your divine, terrifying nature has been watered down into a chapter in a paperback designed to make someone feel slightly more proactive about cleaning out their garage. The tourists, of course, are the final nail in the coffin of your dignity. They walk through the ruins of Knossos, cameras around their necks, complaining about the heat. They listen to a guide recite a sanitized version of your story. They pose for selfies where they pretend to be scared of a crumbling wall where your labyrinth might have been. And then, the grand finale, the gift shop. Here, your humiliation is complete and available for purchase. Your fearsome image is on coffee mugs, keychains, bottle openers, and snow globes where glitter swirls around a tiny plastic you. You have become kitsch, a cheap souvenir. The great terror of the Aegean, the divine punishment that made kings tremble, is now a fridge magnet holding up a shopping list in a suburban kitchen somewhere in Ohio. This is your immortality, a slow, grinding descent from monster to metaphor to merchandise. And so, this is your final form. Not a beast of flesh and blood, but a ghost that haunts the shared human imagination. A ghost they can summon at will to serve whatever purpose they see fit. Your legacy is a testament to the ultimate power of narrative. The one who tells the story holds all the cards. And you never got to speak a single word. Your roars were interpreted as rage, your silence as menace, your very existence as a problem to be solved, a symbol to be deciphered, a product to be sold. You are a story told by your enemies, by your captors, by your exploiters, and finally, by the indifferent descendants who see you as nothing more than a quaint piece of ancient folklore. They analyze the labyrinth, but they miss the point. The labyrinth was not the architectural masterpiece of Daedalus. That was just stone and shadow, a simple, physical prison. The true labyrinth, the one from which you have never escaped, is the twisting, turning, ever-shifting maze of human interpretation. You are trapped within the corridors of their language, their art, their psychology, their commerce. Each new book, each new film, each new theory is another wall, another dead end, another passage that leads only back to a reflection of themselves. They look at you, the monster, and all they have ever seen is a mirror. In the beginning, they saw their political fears. Then they saw their religious guilt. Now they see their psychological insecurities and an opportunity for profit. But they have never, not once, seen you. The creature born of a terrible union, who opened its eyes to a world of cold marble and colder stairs, who lived a life of absolute solitude in a custom-built hell, and who died at the hands of an intruder in its own home. That creature is gone, buried under millennia of stories, interpretations, and bad souvenirs. All that is left is the brand, the Minotaur trademark. What is the ultimate, most profound irony of your modern existence? It's that after everything they did, after they birthed you from their hubris, jailed you for their convenience, killed you for their glory, demonized you for their piety, and psychoanalyzed you for their enlightenment, your greatest tragedy is that you are no longer tragic. You are just content, an endless supply of content for their blogs and dissertations and online games. They finally defeated you, not with a sword, but by making you a permanent, unpaid employee in their vast, noisy, inescapable content factory. And your job is to simply be whatever they need you to be, forever. That is the final truth. The labyrinth was never your prison. It was your sanctuary. The real prison is the world outside it, the world that found you, and never, ever let you go.